So I was asked on Twitter how to count the number of occurrences of a list of an item in a list, and that came actually from the count method in our collections in lists. So I just created this little block of code over here, but what I'm actually going to do is move the block of code up to where we've got our count method and just put it underneath there, inside there, because it's a bit more appropriate. So this is a bit more advanced, so it's not in the series in the same way, but I'm just going to show by way of example how we might go about doing something like this. And the first thing that we'll do is create a list of strings. So let's make a list of strings like this, but actually just let's put in a couple of extra bits. So let's just make Darren, and we will make this occur a few times. So Darren again, and then Darren again, just for the purpose of having multiple things to count. Otherwise we would just be counting one. And let's just, for the sake of it, throw in one extra Bob. So Bob, there we go, just like that. And now when we run this, we have our list of names, which is Alice. We've got two Bobs, Bob and Bob, Charlie, and then we've got Darren, Darren, and Darren. And the challenge would be, can we count how many Bobs there are and how many Darrens there are, for example. So, and I'm going to just show a couple of different methods, but there are actually more methods beyond this, and I'll leave it as a question at the end to post it as kind of like your comments if you have got another way or a better way. So this is just two possible methods of doing this. Now let's say we want to, we'll create a variable, we'll call it find underscore name for the name that we want to find. And let's just say the name we want to find is Darren, which is just like this. Now, I'm going to call this method 1, and I'll call it the classic method. So it's a classical method. And the reason why it's a classical method is it's just going to iterate with a for loop through the collection or through the lists, and that's what we're talking about with iterables. We're going to jump through the list one by one and check. Now, before we jump through the list, we're going to assign another variable called counter, and we're going to initialize that to the value of 0. So our counter starts at 0. So every occurrence of Darren in the list, we will want to increment our counter by 1. So Darren is 1 over here, then Darren is 2, then Darren is 3. So we want to do something like this. Now, the classical pattern in Python is to do something like this with a for loop. So we do for name in names, colon. What does that do? It creates this variable name, and it looks through each of the items in the list, and each item sequentially name becomes that item, and then we want to do a check that if name equals find name. Now look at this equals here. This is a logical equals to, as opposed to this equal sign here, which means assign the value of. So if name is equal to find name, and find name would be the literal of Darren in this particular case, then we want the counter to be incremented by 1. So equals counter plus 1. We want to add 1 onto the value of the counter. So if counter starts at 0, then our next item, our next value of counter will be 0 plus 1. And then, so our value of counter is 1, and our next item would be 1 plus 1, so it'd be 2, and so forth. We could also use a shorthand, which is counter. For the incrementing, we could say that it is plus equal to 1, which also means the same thing. It's shorthand notation, but we'll keep the long, simple, classical notation. And then finally, what we'll do is we want to print out our result. So we could do something like print, and then we'll do an F string because it's convenient to do so. And we will say find name occurs and then counter, because this is how many times it's going to occur, times, and then full stop. So this is our classical method, and let's just try and run it. We're expecting to get Darren occurs and then 3 times. So hopefully this one will work, and then we run it and we see that Darren occurs 3 times just down the bottom over here. Now, just to show that there are other methods, this one's a little bit more complicated, but it's called, so it's going to be method 2, which is a list comprehension. Now, at first this does look a little bit complicated, but actually when you get used to it, it's probably easier than the classical method. And this is known to be more Pythonic. So what we do is a list comprehension is something like this: name for name in names. We are literally again going to hop through every name in this list, and we could have used X for X in names. This is just a placeholder variable, and so was this a placeholder variable, but we're going to hop through every name in this particular list, and for name in names, and then if name equals, and then again find name. Now, if we just print out this list, what are we actually going to get? So let's have a look, just for the purpose of understanding. We get Darren, Darren, Darren. So we're going to get name for name in names if the name is equal to Darren. So every time that name is equal to Darren, it's going to append this new list, this list comprehension. Now, what we want to actually do is get the count of it. So all we need to know is the length of this particular list, which is of length number 3, because there were 3 Darrens, and therefore we can assign that to our value counter all in one go and all on one line of code in Python. So this is one very simple way of a one-liner to do the same thing, and we can print here for the name, whatever the name is, our find name, which is Darren, occurs counter number of times. So let's just do that, and we will run it, and we see Darren occurs 3 times. But what we'll actually do is we will just change find name over here to Bob this time, and we will run the same loop, and we should get Bob occurs 2 times. So we've got 2 different methods of counting the number of occurrences of an item in a list, and I leave it for the reader or the viewers to add their comments or more items or more methods for how to count the number of occurrences of an item in a list.